The most skipped paragraph in the Christmas story erupts when you slow down long enough to let the ink sink in. A column of names in Matthew 1, a staircase of fathers and sons in Luke 3, and most eyes glaze over. The ancient world did the opposite. In first-century Judea, a name carried land, law, and destiny. A genealogical line could grant you the temple courts, or keep you outside the fence. Ezra recorded entire families disqualified from the priesthood because their names were missing in the registry. The line of the Messiah would not ride in on a vibe. It would hang on names inked across centuries, carrying promises older than the stones of Jerusalem. Matthew opens with a phrase that sounds like a whisper from Genesis, the book of the Genesis of Jesus Christ. That line is not casual. In the Greek of the Septuagint, the genealogies of Genesis 5 and 10 use the same phrase. Matthew signals a new creation, a new Genesis dawning, from a line that has been watched since Eden. Every name is a mile marker. Abraham to David, David to the exile, exile to Christ. 14 generations, 14, then 14 again. Not an accident, an arrangement, a memory device, and a message. In Hebrew, the name David is 3 letters. Dalet, Vav, Dalet. 4, 6, 4. 14. Matthew flashes David in triple, carving an exclamation across Israel's memory. This is the Son of David, in a structure designed to be memorized, sung, and recited. That shape contains airbrushed edges, and Matthew does it intentionally. He telescopes the list, the same way the writers of Chronicles telescope earlier lists. Ahaziah, Joash, and Amaziah drop out between Joram and Uzziah in Matthew's list. Jehoiakim also drops out between Josiah and Jeconiah. In Hebrew thought, to say A begat B could mean A begat someone who begat B. Line and legacy mattered more than every single branch. It is how ancient genealogies moved. Lean, purposeful, symbolic without being fictional. The artistry is real, and the point is sharper than a blade. The line that matters cuts straight through Abraham to David to Christ, the child born under the star. Genealogies can be laments. This one is a trumpet. The shock lands even harder when you see the women. Ancient Jewish genealogy rarely names women. Matthew names 4 before he reaches Mary, and every one is a lightning bolt. Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and the wife of Uriah, not the sanitized matriarchs. Women whose stories carried scandal, grief, and Gentile blood. Tamar dressed as a prostitute to force Judah to do his duty. Rahab, the harlot of Jericho, hung a scarlet cord from a pagan wall. Ruth walked into Israel as a Moabite, a people with a stain in Deuteronomy. Bathsheba enters Matthew's line not even by name at first, but as the wife of Uriah, the Hittite, who should have lived, the man David had killed. Matthew does not hide. He highlights. He draws a spotlight over 4 stories that shout a theme. The Messiah's line breaks open the gates to the outsider, forgives the worst failures, and turns scandal into a straight road. Isaiah saw that day when he wrote that the nations would hope in the root of Jesse. Matthew lets those nations step forward by name before Jesus' birth takes place in Bethlehem. The effect is uneven in a way that feels exactly like life. In one direction you see kings and crowns. In the other, you see fields and furnaces. All of it converges on a baby whose bed is a feeding trough. The names tell you why he does not need to hold a sword to be a king. The right to rule is in the bones of this child. The line does not begin with David's crown. It begins with a promise whispered under stars. God tells Abraham that his seed will bless every nation on earth. That seed becomes a thread you can trace through Genesis and kinks in the road. Isaac over Ishmael, Jacob over Esau. Judah's tribe carries the scepter in Jacob's prophecy in Genesis 49. The line narrows, and the stakes climb. The thread ties itself to Ruth's field in Bethlehem. The barley is tall. The gleanings are small. Boaz acts as a kinsman redeemer. and marries Ruth under the eyes of elders at the town gate, a legal act with a spiritual echo. The Redeemer's story is present in the very structure of Boaz's deed, written into law long centuries before in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. The baby, born to Ruth and Boaz, becomes the grandfather of David, and Bethlehem's little town becomes royal. Micah will call its name centuries later, promising that out of Bethlehem Ephrathah, small among the clans of Judah, one will come forth who will rule. The seed is planted in that field long before wise men travel the ridge roads toward an unassuming house with a toddler inside. When Matthew names Ruth and Rahab, it reads like a finger pressed against the map at Jericho, then tracing to Bethlehem, then pointing toward a manger. The genealogical list at the beginning is not telling a side story. It is the story. It loads the manger scene with the entire freight of Israel's covenant history. David's covenant in 277 rings as the promise that David's descendant will build a house for God and his throne will be established forever. Isaiah's shoot from the stump of Jesse grows in the background of every line. If Jesse is a stump, the line has been cut down. If a shoot rises, the line lives. And then a siren blares from Jeremiah's scroll. The list in Matthew passes through Jeconiah, the king also known as Jehoiachin, a man carried into exile by Babylon. Over his house a prophet writes a curse. Record this man childless, Jeremiah 22 says, a man who will not prosper, for none of his offspring will sit on David's throne and rule in Judah. Readers in the first century would flinch at this name, a royal roadblock, a poisoned well. The claim of Jesus as king passes right through a man under a prophetic hammer. This is not a wrinkle. This is a tear. Matthew keeps Jeconiah in place and keeps moving. He has reasons. One reading sees the curse limited to Jeconiah's immediate behavior and lifetime, something that breaks when he repents during exile and is lifted from prison by the Babylonian king and honored. Another thread runs through Haggai. The prophet declares a word from God to Zerubbabel, grandson of Jeconiah, through Shealtiel, calling him the signet ring of God. Jeremiah's image of a signet ring ripped off had represented judgment. Haggai's signet ring placed on the hand of God represents a restoration. Grace smashes glass ceilings. The name that looked like a dead end becomes part of the bridge. Yet Matthew leaves the scandal intact. He does not smooth out the bumps. He lets the ache stay visible. That ache has a second solution, and the genealogy of Luke opens the map to see it. Matthew follows Solomon, the royal succession. Luke traces a different branch of David's family, the line through Nathan, another son of David and Bathsheba. Matthew goes from David to Solomon to Rehoboam, and down the royal road to Jeconiah, Shealtiel, Zerubbabel, and eventually to Joseph. Luke runs from Jesus back through Heli, who was associated with Joseph, then further back to Nathan and David, and eventually all the way beyond Abraham to Adam and to God. The lines converge at David and diverge immediately after, then touch again at Shealtiel and Zerubbabel, a place where the family tree seems to tangle, and then untangle again. The double appearance of Shealtiel and Zerubbabel in both genealogies does not create chaos. It grants clarity. The family endured the exile together. Lines crossed, legal and biological ties braided when death, levirate marriage, and adoption made complex patterns. Luke's list is placed in a striking spot. After Jesus is baptized in the Jordan, the heavens open, and the Spirit descends like a dove. The voice announces Jesus as the beloved Son. Luke then unrolls the story backward, generation by generation, until the line ascends past Abraham, past Noah, past Enoch and Methuselah, past Seth to Adam, and beyond Adam to God. The public declaration of sonship at the river is mirrored by a genealogical chain that ends with God, whose image Adam bears. Luke shapes his list with a symbolic count. Many readers count 77 names in Luke's genealogy, a number that evokes completeness to a Jewish mind steeped in sevens. Where Matthew stamps David and kingship, Luke stamps creation and new humanity. Jesus stands in the river as the Son of God, and the line behind him does not stop until it reaches the source, the Creator. Luke includes a name in his ancient sources that the Hebrew Masoretic text of Genesis does not have, a Canaan between Arphaxad and Shelah. The Septuagint, the Greek Old Testament, widely used in the 1st century, includes this name, and Luke follows that stream. He roots his readers in the scripture they knew in Greek, in synagogues from Antioch to Alexandria. The point remains the same. Jesus belongs in Israel's flesh and blood story, and also recasts that story for the entire human family. The angelic announcement over shepherds in fields is universal news because this line carries the world inside it. Ancient readers understood how legal and biological lines could diverge without friction. Tribal identity and legal inheritance in Israel passed through the father. The Mishnah later articulates these realities, and the Torah already established them, and the law provided for Levirate marriage. In Deuteronomy 25, if a man died childless, his brother would marry the widow, and the firstborn son would be named after the dead brother to carry on his name and inheritance. The man could be a legal father without being the biological father, and the son could be recorded in a genealogical register under the deceased. Early Christian historians preserved a Jewish explanation that fits this world. Eusebius quotes the 2nd century scholar Julius Africanus, who reports a family tradition that Mathan and Melchi married the same woman in succession. Mathan, a descendant of Solomon, fathered Jacob, then died. Melchi, a descendant of Nathan, married the widow and fathered Heli. Heli died childless, and Jacob raised up a child for him by Mary, under Levirate custom. Joseph could be the biological son of Jacob and the legal son of Heli. This was not a stretch to antiquity. It was ordinary law in a land where names held land. The gospel writers do not stage a legal drama to explain this. They simply record the reality they lived with. Matthew names Joseph's father as Jacob. Luke lists Joseph, as was supposed, the son of Heli, a line that fits Levirate dynamics, son-in-law usage, or dual paternity under Israel's law. The Greek grammar in Luke puts the definite article with all the names except Joseph, a subtle feature some read as indicating a shift in how Joseph's relationship to Heli operates. Meanwhile, Matthew's Greek grammar becomes razor-sharp when he reaches Mary. He switches from a masculine plural to a feminine singular, of whom Jesus was born. The whom is singular feminine. Matthew quietly writes into the genealogy the virginal conception he will narrate in the very next breath. The names not only carry kingship, they carry miracle. Matthew keeps a courtroom tone in his opening chapter. He rolls through the names and then records Joseph's crisis with clarity and brevity. Joseph is called a son of David by the angel in his dream, a legal title that matters. He is told to name the child Jesus because he will save his people from their sins. Naming is not a decorative act. In the ancient world, the father who names the child claims and legitimizes the child. Jesus stands in the Davidic line legally through Joseph. Matthew's list does not record Mary's ancestry directly, but Luke's story calls Mary a relative of Elizabeth, a woman from the priestly line of Aaron. Intermarriage between tribes did not erase the tribal identity of fathers, but it knit together Judah and Levi in the house of Jesus' family. And early Christian tradition and hints in Luke point toward Mary herself being of Davidic stock, a natural outcome in a small Judean village of David's line. The scaffolding is consistent. Joseph gives Jesus royal legal status and a home in David's town. Mary gives Jesus flesh and fulfills the prophecy of a virgin conceiving and bearing a son. The tension with Jeconiah remains charged and resolved at once. The royal line through Solomon and Jeconiah gives Jesus kingship by right under Joseph's name. The bloodline solution through Nathan and Luke removes the direct biological tie to Jeconiah. if one reads Luke as Mary's line, and the prophetic solution in Haggai restores the dynasty symbolically in Zerubbabel. Each line taken alone offers a path. Together they create a net that holds under pressure. The curse that hung over Jeconiah does not topple the promise to David, because God preserved the line legally and preserved the flesh through another branch. Promises can seem to collide until the architecture becomes visible, and then they click like gears into place. Shealtiel and Zerubbabel stand like embrasures on both lists for a reason. Their names carry the exile in them. Shealtiel means asked of God. Zerubbabel means born in Babylon, seed of Babylon. A family that entered the furnace comes out with an ember alive. Ezra and Haggai both watch that ember glow as the Second Temple's foundations are laid. The prophets saw the temple rising from rubble and spoke of a greater glory that would walk into its courts. The Son of David would make that glory real one day, even if Herod's stones tried to shine. Zerubbabel's presence in both genealogies is a sign that the line had not died, it had been tempered. The unseen mathematics of Matthew's arrangement keeps saying more. 3 groups of 14 is not just about David's name. 3 groups of 14 make 6 sevens. The list ends with Jesus, who opens the 7th seven. Sabbath, stacked upon Sabbath, terminates in a person, a messenger greater than the temple, a rest greater than Canaan, a release greater than a jubilee year. The story of Israel, measured in genealogical weeks, culminates in a child who will later declare rest for the weary. Matthew layers that meaning into his list not with a theological essay, but with a memorized count. Some scribes in the early centuries noticed that Matthew's list contains names that echo other biblical figures. Asa appears as Asaph in some Greek manuscripts, and Ammon appears as Amos. Ordinary copyists often tried to tame those forms by conforming them back to the kings in Chronicles. Early Christian scholars like R.T. France and others have observed that the original readings may very well have been Asaph and Amos, names associated with prophetic and psalmic voices. Matthew may be drawing a line through prophetic hope, even as he draws a line through royal succession. The echoes are deliberate, without being deceitful. Matthew is a teacher, placing jewels in a line on a string, each stone catching another's light. You can hear the exile crack wide open in the second stanza of Matthew's list. After David and the kings, the majority of names run through men and families nobody preached on for centuries. Abiud, Eliakim, Azor, Zadok, Akim, Eliud, Eleazar, Mathan, Jacob. Ordinary men living in an empire's shadow, going to market, marrying, reciting psalms, burying parents, telling the stories of David by a small fire. The world calls them forgettable. God calls them protagonists in a promise. The diaspora, and then the return under Persian rule washed away fanfare. The line survived without a throne to sit on. And then, one day a village carpenter wakes up from a dream with a name on his lips and a willingness to obey, and he marries a woman, already carrying the one the world had waited for since Eden. That, as was supposed in Luke, is a razor that cuts everything that does not belong. Jesus is truly a man, because his genealogy moves through soil and sweat all the way back to Adam. Jesus is truly the Son of God, because the line runs through Adam to God, and because his conception came from the Spirit without a human father. Genealogy frames doctrine without insisting on a classroom. Scripture turns a list into a lens. The law's pathway for legal fatherhood makes Joseph's role not a footnote, but a cornerstone. When Matthew records that Joseph adopted Jesus by naming him, he records a legal act that transferred Davidic rights. That is why the angel addresses Joseph as son of David. He stands in the line that matters on a deed to a kingdom. In a culture where property was proved by genealogy, a Messiah without a line would be dismissed in a single breath. No one in the gospel record challenges Jesus' Davidic claim. Even the blind beggar in Jericho calls him son of David, and no one rebukes him for being wrong about lineage. The leaders rejected Jesus for other reasons, but lineage was not among the accusations. The records were still in living memory, stored and memorized in families, preserved in temple or synagogue registers. By the time Eusebius wrote in the 4th century, he preserved the testimony of Desposini, the relatives of Jesus, who kept family records passed down from elders who remembered Joseph's line. Africanus explained intricacies that only families keep around a table at sunset, pointing to Joseph's dual relationship to Jacob and Heli, both true in different senses. Ancient lore like that either rings true to a world, or it evaporates in its air. This one rings true. The house of David and the house of Levi, standing in relationship inside the family of Jesus, brings prophecy into real space. Zechariah, the priest from the division of Abijah, fathers John the Baptist with Elizabeth. Mary and Elizabeth are relatives. Luke lets priestly incense curl into the narrative right before the angel Gabriel announces the conception of Jesus, the Son of the Most High, who will sit on the throne of David forever. Kingship and priestly witness stand side by side in the nativity narrative. Psalm 110 anticipated a figure who is both seated at God's right hand and a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. The story of the nativity touches those themes at angles, like light passing through windows at different times of day. From the river of names in Luke another key flows. Luke's genealogy lives in the air after Jesus' baptism, a placement that explodes with meaning. Israel crossed water out of Egypt and into a wilderness tested and tempted. Jesus crosses the Jordan into a wilderness and is tested and tempted. Unlike Adam, he resists. Unlike Israel, he succeeds. The names in Luke are the grandstands for that obedience. Adam is there. Noah is there. Abraham is there. David is there. It is as if generations lean forward when Jesus refuses bread from the wrong hands and refuses the shortcut to a kingdom without a cross. The line behind him breathes again. The genealogy is not a dusty museum. It is a roar from the stands when the true son steps onto the track. The geography of the story clicks exactly into place with the names. Bethlehem is David's town, Ruth's town, the town Micah named. Joseph goes up to register in Bethlehem because he is of the house and lineage of David. State power drives him there. A census is the lever. He would not have gone without that force because he lived in Nazareth in Galilee, far to the north. God uses the mechanisms of empires to put a pregnant virgin where the prophet said she should be when the time comes for labor. The house of bread receives the bread of life, and the shepherds of Judah become first messengers in the night. The genealogy pinned the location like a needle pinning a map. The names made Bethlehem inevitable. The shadows of kings in Matthew's list get one of their most tragic outlines in an Idumean monarch. Herod has the title King of the Jews from Rome. He sits on a throne the line of David should occupy. He reconstructs the Temple Mount like a magician with stones as assistants. He does not have the right blood. He knows it. Stories from later sources accuse him of trying to erase genealogical records to hide his origins. And even if those stories grew in the telling, they reveal a cultural truth everyone in Judea knew. Family trees mattered so much that a pretender feared them. Matthew's list answers the fear and the longing. The rightful king is alive, even if he sleeps among lambs and straw. Under the surface, the genealogy brings an avalanche of words, from the prophets to a single point. Isaiah 7 delivers a sign. A virgin will conceive and bear a son, and call his name Emmanuel, God with us. The weight of that statement demands proof that the child is born in the right house, among the right people. Isaiah 11 shows the shoot rising from Jesse's stump when the royal line looks dead. Jeremiah 23 promises a righteous branch raised up for David, who will reign and execute justice. Micah 5 pins the town. Isaiah 9 declares the child with names that sound like the universe kneeling. The beginning of Matthew sets those prophecies into a framework you can hang a life on. The 4 women Matthew names cut the lock even wider. Tamar's vindication in Genesis 38 sits in tension with Judah's sin and cowardice. Rahab's inclusion stands in tension with her past and her people. Ruth's faithfulness swallows up her outsider status. Bathsheba's grief sits beside the weight of David's guilt. The Messiah's family is a collision of grace and judgment, and grace rides out victorious. Matthew draws Mary into that line of women and adds a twist none of the others carry: a virgin conceived. The shock is not only moral, but ontological. The Creator moved into the creation through a womb. The genealogy pulls the concept out of the abstract. God did not parachute into history. He tunneled in along a path he promised to walk. If you can track Jesus back to Adam, the good news is not just for Bethlehem or even Israel. It is for every language that calls Adam father. The world these names belong to was small enough for people to know each other's grandfathers, and big enough to stretch across empires. The Babylonian exile in 586 BC looks like the end of everything. The Persians under Cyrus allowed a return in 538 BC, and the temple was completed in 516 BC. Zerubbabel and Joshua the high priest lead early waves. Ezra and Nehemiah follow later. Rebuild, weep over a foundation, read the Torah aloud in the square, and swear oaths to separate from everything that would pull them back into disaster. The Davidic throne remained empty. Prophecy seemed paused. Names kept coming. The 10 Commandments carved into stone felt stable. The human names written on scrolls felt fragile. God's hand made the fragile endure longer than stone. The differences in Matthew's and Luke's genealogies drove ancient readers to solve, not to scoff. A Talmudic phrase about families who guarded their genealogies like treasure matches everything else we know. Julius Africanus wrote around AD 200 to families who still claimed relation to Jesus. He records how Levite marriage and half-brothers could produce 2 lines for Joseph that were both true by different standards. He names Mothin and Melchi, and a woman called Estha, in some manuscripts, married to both men successively, producing Jacob and Heli. When Heli died childless, Jacob fathered Joseph for him, after the custom of Deuteronomy. Law, not speculation. People sometimes picture genealogy as clean lines on a chart. The reality looked like this. War, plague, and tragedy required legal remedies that honored the dead, preserved inheritance, and gave names continuity. The Shealtiel question in the lists reveals the same world. In Matthew, Jeconiah begets Shealtiel. In Luke, Shealtiel is called the son of Neri on the Nathan side of David's house, probably through levirate or adoption. In both lists, Shealtiel begets Zerubbabel. Chronicles adds another turn, naming Pedaiah as father of Zerubbabel, likely a brother raising a child under levirate law for Shealtiel. That is not a tangle. That is the law at work in a world that honored names. The writers were not trying to impress later critics. They were anchoring their lives in their scriptures. When people speak about the Messiah being the son of David, they are not spouting a slogan. They are standing on a legal claim backed by a genealogy publicly accessible to contemporaries. Paul calls Jesus descended from David according to the flesh in Romans 1, and tells Timothy to remember Jesus Christ, risen from the dead, the offspring of David, in 2000 Timothy 2. Revelation names him the root and offspring of David, the bright morning star. The early Christian proclamation welded Jesus' resurrection to his royal lineage. Death broken and kingship restored, fit like hand and glove. Bethlehem's place in the story acts like a living seal on the genealogy. The journey from Nazareth to Judea is not random. Joseph belongs to David's house, and he must register there. A Roman decree intersects with ancient promise and produces a scene that overpowered the world. Shepherds become witnesses. A manger becomes a throne room. A cry echoes the vow God made to David so long ago. The child lives under the legal shelter of Joseph's name and the divine overshadowing of the Spirit. And the townspeople, if they had wanted, could have asked for Joseph's line. They would have read the names. They would have nodded. No one could deny that the man in that house was a son of David. The Magi arrived from the east after some time, educated astrologers or wise men who read stars and texts, and saw a sign pointing them toward a king. Their gifts echo Psalm 72 and Isaiah 60, images of nations bringing tribute to the Davidic king. Gold for royalty, frankincense for priestly presence, myrrh for burial, hinting at a shadow already falling across a cradle. Their road started far away, but their hearts traveled along a line older than Babylon's palaces. Abraham had been promised that nations would be blessed. They walked in the fulfillment and laid their riches down. A genealogy that included Rahab of Canaan and Ruth of Moab now hosted Persians or Babylonians at its doorstep. Outsiders were always invited. Even the little details of Matthew's phrasing carry theological freight. He repeats the formula, and Jacob begat Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called Christ. He does not say, Joseph begat Jesus. He breaks the rhythm to make room for the miracle. Matthew has already told you why. Isaiah's prophecy of a virgin is being fulfilled, and the Greek makes it precise. The relative pronoun whom is feminine singular. Joseph is not the begetter. He is the legal father. Mary is the mother and only human parent. The child is conceived by the Spirit. The genealogy does not lead you to the wrong conclusion. It leads you to worship. Luke's genealogical chain rises and falls like a song. He places it not at the beginning, but as a kind of hinge in his narrative. Jesus moves from private life to public mission, and the list announces that his mission encompasses all of humanity. He is not only the son of David, he is the son of Adam. The early church could preach the gospel to Jews in synagogues from the genealogies. It could also preach it to Greeks in marketplaces, because the gospel speaks the human language of belonging. Names address the most primal human need, the need to not be forgotten. Your name speaks you into a community. The Messiah enters by a list that asserts he belongs everywhere, because he belongs in the right house and beyond it. And the curse that hung over Jeconiah becomes part of the glory. A signet ring removed in Jeremiah becomes a signet ring restored in Haggai. God's faithful love for David's house does not break. It bends around the hardness of men's hearts and continues. The restoration after exile is partial and aching. No Davidic king sits visibly on a throne. Rome's eagles cast a shadow over every scene. But God does not count thrones the way empires count them. He counts promise kept. He counts birth in the right village to the right mother under the right name. The way Matthew ends his genealogy carries subtle rhythm. He writes, Jacob begat Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called Christ. Then he pauses and opens his Christmas story. It is as if he sets the scene with an ancient drumbeat, and then invites you to watch the moment everything the drumbeat promised arrives. The names do not vanish. They stand kneeling around the cradle. Abraham kneels. David kneels. Hezekiah kneels. Rahab kneels. Ruth kneels. 1,000 unnamed faithful kneel in the dust and cry out in relief. The list of men, women, failure, and faith finds its center in a newborn who will make everything new. Matthew and Luke did not waste ink. They loaded names with a king. The debates around these lists have lived for centuries, and that is worth celebrating. Faithful readers chase down details to keep honoring the text they loved. The second Canaan in Luke, the order and arrangement of names, Joseph's dual fatherhood by different reckonings, the women who defy expectation, the grammar around Mary's role, the legal meaning of adoption in ancient Judea, the bold structure of 3:14s, and the possible echo of the seventh seven, the Davidic gematria, the exile's ark, the link to Zerubbabel's temple and Haggai's promise, the priestly connection through Elizabeth, the legal power of naming a child, the place of Bethlehem under Roman census law, the silence of public challenge to Jesus' lineage in the Gospels, and the apostolic preaching of Davidic descent all fit together. The picture they create is not messy. It is mosaic. Up close you see jagged lines. Step back and you see a face that changes the world. Your Christmas manger scene holds a family tree behind it. Every light you hang around your window belongs to names that lived in tents, palaces, and exile camps. Every carol plays a chord written in these lists. Scripture is not afraid of history. It leans into it. The God who promised to Abraham, spoke to David, thundered through Jeremiah, and comforted through Haggai, arrived exactly where and when and how he said he would. The average reader shrugs at a string of names. Matthew and Luke knew that reaction. They trusted time and truth anyway. They trusted that one day someone would sit with a Bible open and feel a shock run through their chest when they realized those names carry a claim unlike any other claim in human history. A child born in Bethlehem has the right to be called the Christ because the names are true. And prophecies once whispered in deserts and courts now explode in a carpenter's house and on a Roman cross and out of an empty tomb. Bethlehem's cradle leads to Calvary's cross. The genealogy leads to the crucifixion inscription written in 3 languages. Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Pilate posted the title to mock. The irony became proclamation. Matthew had already posted the title in ink. The sign on the cross and the first sentence of Matthew agree. Luke does not contradict. He expands. He shows how the Son of David is also the Son of Adam and Son of God, and that he carries the world back to Eden's gate and opens it forever. The line never stopped. It began before there were kings. It moved through famine, scandal, conquest, and captivity. It outlived empires. It passed through nameless artisans and dreamers. It climbed narrow stairs in Bethlehem and walked dusty roads to Nazareth and Jerusalem. It found its fulfillment in a teenage girl's womb and a man's obedient naming. And it continues in a different way still, because this king makes a new family not of bloodlines but of faith. Names keep being written, not on vellum this time, but in a book John calls the Book of Life. The first Christmas genealogy teaches how God keeps promises through names. The rest of the story shows how he keeps writing them.